right. Hello, everyone. I think we are ready to get started, actually. Um, I think and I'm hoping that we have some kind of an audio in this case. Um, it's a bit hard for me to monitor, so I'm hoping that everything is working okay here. I know for a fact that there usually is a bit of a delay, so I'm hoping that we are going out correctly. I can see now that we have picture at least. So let's get started. We are here today to discuss microservices from a finance and operations perspective. Microsoft has done this for a while, but so let's first get started with a bit of a presentation here. My name is Johan Persson. I work as a senior technical specialist at Engage Group, who we are located in Stockholm, and I also am one of the hosts for the Dynamic Update podcast. So if you are curious in knowing what is going on with Dynamics and to see what we are doing every single day. Okay, I just got information that the image is black. So because I'm seeing it on LinkedIn, I'm seeing the image and I'm seeing myself and I'm seeing the presentation. So I'm wondering if okay, so I get a thumbs up. I'm interpreting that as being that we are live and that we are visible. So let's start again. My name is Johan Persson. I work as a senior technical specialist at Engage Group, and I am also one of the hosts of the Dynamics Update podcast together with my colleague Gustav Sundblad. So if you're curious more into what is happening with finance and operations and to see what is going on and what's coming out in the next version, please feel free to just subscribe to the podcast and you will get a lot more information from all of the smart people like Gustav and so on. So let's get started first of all. I'm guessing that if you're running F&O today, you have seen that there has popped up a couple of add-ins in the LCS. And those are the ones that we're actually discussing today. But first of all, I would like to start by giving you some kind of a background. So what is a microservice, really? So if you're used to AX 2012, AX 2012 is sort of what we call a monolithic application. We have a lot of functionality all bundled into one application, and everything there is interconnected and has dependencies, which means that it's a bit tricky to service and it's a bit tricky to update and so on. So the point of microservices is actually breaking functionality out of this monolithic application. In some cases, we do it internally, so we can break up. For instance, if we look at sales, CRM today, we have broken it up into separate applications, which are sort of standalone, but they are still a part of something bigger. Another way to do this is breaking things apart altogether and actually only having APIs between them. And that is what we call a microservices model. So breaking it out, making all of the pieces much smaller and having well-defined interconnected APIs between them is sort of the thing that we're discussing here today. The whole point here is that we are then working with smaller units. We're not working with one big application. What we also win by this is individual updatability. We can update every single small unit by itself. We don't have to do it all in once, as long as we keep the APIs and the interfaces between them well defined and intact, we can basically update whatever we want. And that's sort of the point in why we're doing it in F&O as well. We can have a different maintenance schedule on all of them. Of course, there will be situations where we do need to synchronize updates between why am I hearing myself? All right, let's do like this, because I can't listen to myself. All right, so let's continue. One of the points as well is that it's stateless, meaning that we are using an external data source, meaning that in some cases, it's actually just code containing these microservices. They don't contain any data. They don't contain any databases. They are totally independent of everything else. They are also scalable, meaning that we can actually build them out, scale them up, and scale them, especially scale them out in a way that we don't need to take the data into account. If we have a big rush of users, if we have a big rush in transactions, we can actually add a couple more of these microservices, because they don't need to interact with each other. They only interact with the connected other services, and they have, as I said, they don't have any states, so we can actually upgrade them and do whatever we want to them. So the question in this case is, will it get more or less complex if we build out these microservices? Yeah, so, I mean, as I said before, the interconnections between the different components in a monolithic applications are in itself complex. Having a long chain of things that we work with is also a complexity, but it's a bit of it's an easier complexity to manage. We don't have to understand the entirety. We just need to understand how our component is talking to the closest ones, the closest components next to us in that case. So that's why I think that it's really important to do this, because it makes things a lot easier. Another part in this is that since we don't have any state and we don't have any, we don't have that many dependencies, we can actually geolocate these microservices in different regions around the world, meaning that if we need to combat latency, for instance, we can actually put one on each continent and having them talk to the connected system on the back end, which meaning that we can actually make the experience easier for the single users. And also resilience, of course. If one of these microservices crashes, it's much easier to just spin up a new one. I mean, it's not broken. We can just throw it away and spin up a new one. And this is made possible a lot by the Azure Services and so on, meaning that we can automate these things. And of course, it's serviceable. We don't need to have the same schedules for servicing all of the parts in the chain. We can do it individually, and we don't have to risk breaking everything, as long as we keep the interfaces between the applications or the components the same. So, are these microservices new? No. I mean, we have sort of done this before. When we moved the AIF out of, when we moved logic out of AIF and into a separate integration platform, that is sort of the same thing. We are moving complexity into another application. CRM and ERP are separated, so that's basically the same thing. We're using dual write to talk between them, which means that we have a semi well-defined API between them. Dynamics 365 for talent is also one of these. I mean, we used to have the HR module. Then we have had talent for a while, and now we are back to the HR module again. So this is also a part in where we can actually break things out of the core application and put them into into something that is self-hosted, and in many cases even better. I mentioned before, CRM is broken down into sales, customer engagement, field service. Those used to be one applications back in the days. And I will also argue that what we have done in AX 2012 with the retail modules, breaking them out into channel databases, clients, and not making them extremely dependent on the AX 2012 backend, is actually sort of a way of doing the same thing. I mean, I'm not saying that we have extremely well defined APIs, but it's also a way to drag these ones apart a bit. So we have a couple of microservices that are available today. We have export to data lake, planning optimization, IoT intelligence, tax calculation service, finance insights, expense management, electronic invoicing, and inventory visibility. And those are all available through LCS. You might have seen this screen here. This is actually one of our environments where we have activated some of the add-ins, not all of them. So if I click on install a new add-in, I will actually get the pane on the right side where I can actually add more of them. So IoT intelligence, global stock accounting, and so on. Electronic invoices, expense management. For those of you who noticed this, global stock accounting is actually not one of the ones I had in my presentation. And that sort of proves my point that Microsoft can innovate on these without having to change the entire product. They can actually build things outside of the product without having it be dependent on F&O releases. So thank you, Microsoft, for proving my point. But I will spend this session going through some of the microservices, and at the end, I will try to summarize it all a bit. So I would say that the most important one is export to data lake. And why am I saying that? So first of all, it will be eventually replacing Bring Your Database. It will be replacing the data warehouse, the entity store. It's much cheaper storage than using Azure SQL, for instance. You will use it for analytics. But the most important part here, it's infrastructure for some of the other add-ins, some of the other microservices. So if you, for instance, install the inventory visibility add-in, you will be asked to set up export to data lake first, because otherwise it won't work. So that is sort of a prerequisite for most of them. So I would say that this is the one that most of you should go with. It is now in GA. The only little part that is not in GA right now is the trickle feed. So the near real-time push to data lake. It is finished, but it has a dependency on an Azure service that isn't quite out of GA yet, but it actually is out of GA right now. It became that about a week ago or so, but the Dynamics team hasn't really just pushed the trigger on making trickle feed available GA as well. But I would expect it to come in the upcoming weeks. But this is sort of the important one. This is where you should start. This is one that I would say every implementation should have up and running for no other reason than to have it as infrastructure. We have the planning optimization. This one is, since a while back, mandatory. So it's actually one of the features that we can't really disable anymore. It is replacing the MRP. And this actually proves a bit why the microservices architecture is such a great thing, because I have had a lot of customer who has been complaining about the MRP. The MRP is slow. It takes a lot of time. We are running it during night because we don't want to affect performance of the AX 2012 instance, for instance, and so on. And customers who are running the new planning optimization actually says that the same job that took 8 hours to run before now runs in sort of under an hour. So first of all, we are not putting load on the F&O environment. That is an important part. We are also using compute power in Azure to do things that usually was done within finance and operations. And I think this is sort of a really great example on why this architecture is the way forward in this case. We have the IoT intelligence. The whole point of this is to create an interface towards the IoT Event Hub, which is in Azure. So the reason here for using the IoT intelligence add-in is so that we don't have to create code to integrate to IoT Event Hub. So this is basically an API for an API. So it's the glue between F&O and especially supply chain management into IoT Event Hub. So we have 3 main scenarios right now. We have delayed orders, equipment down, and quality and anomaly. And the whole point here is that we don't have to build our own code. We don't have to build our own integrations. It just clicks into place with Azure IoT Hub. And that's also one of the things that can actually remove complexity and decision from a customer doing these kinds of implementation, which I think is really, really great. The tax calculation service is available from 10.0.21, and it's reliant on the RCS service. So if you haven't migrated yet from LCS to RCS for electronic reporting, that is a mandatory step in this case. You need to have RCS in place in order to use tax calculation service. The point of tax calculation service is to create like a matrix rule set for tax calculations for different countries. All locations are not available yet. Asia, Pacific, Australia, Canada, Europe, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States are the ones that are being built first off. If you're going for other countries, they are not really available yet. But I would expect this to be things that pop up really, really soon, because it's a cool application, and it's also one of those specific applications that you usually use to have like an ISV to handle tax calculations. So I would say that having this working out of the box in a microservice is, I think it's a good thing for the customer all in all. Finance Insights, it's actually also one of the first microservices that became available, and it has to do with cash flow. So the whole point of this is that it actually predicts cash flow, requires export to data lake, as I mentioned before. It requires historical data because it's based on a machine learning model, which is in Azure, and it takes your historical data, it calculates future future cash flow indications based on how specific customers have been using the system before. So this is also one of the things that I really like, because one of the challenges I think Microsoft has had when it comes to AI and machine learning is that Microsoft thinks that AI and machine learning is a really, really important part. The problem is that the customers hasn't really gotten to that point. When Microsoft released AI in Azure, the customer said, "Oh, this is way too complex. We can't do this because it takes like data scientists and a lot of expertise to do this." So what they did, they released the AI Builder in Power Platform, which was meant to make it much easier. I think the problem is still that it's too complicated, especially around the fact that it doesn't point you to a specific scenario for using AI. You need to figure out why you are using AI anyway. The whole point of Finance Insights, I would say, is that this is an extremely narrow business case, telling the customer that if you implement this, it will give you better insight into your cash flow, and you don't really have to understand that this is an AI model. So that's why I think that it's a great way to step into using machine learning algorithms and getting the use case for those. And I think that's really good as well. Expense management. This is one that we in Europe really can't use that much. It's basically only available in the US. But the whole point of it is, as it says, you are reporting expenses. It is replacing the original expense management workspace, but it's also using Azure Cognitive Services in order to interpret receipts and so on. And one of the cool things, if you're in the US, is that you can actually use it and connect it directly to your credit card provider, meaning that they can match the receipts to the actual expense and having it move directly into the system. So I'm really looking forward to this being available outside of the US because this is makes it a lot easier. Electronic invoicing is also one of those where we have had traditionally ISVs doing this for us. It will also require RCS. The point right now is that it's being used between business and government. And the reason for that is that if you're looking at the government in a certain country, they have specific set of invoices that they can send and that they can receive. That format doesn't change that often. It's not arbitrary to which customer. It looks the same for every customer in that country, meaning that it's a very good payback on implementing this format into a microservice and having it push transactions in and out of finance and operations directly. And I think that's really good. The whole point also is that it has a connection to the web service endpoints, meaning that if you're, for instance, sending invoices to a government, it will actually interface directly to the endpoint at the government, meaning that you will not even have to have an integration component picking up the file and sending it manually, but you can actually just post it and it will be sent automatically, which I think is a good thing because that makes the solution a bit less complex. Some fewer integration components that you need to monitor and keep track of, and that I think is important. Now we come to inventory visibility, Gustav's favorite. The whole point of this is to have real-time insight into your inventory, especially for systems that are not integrated into Dataverse and finance and operations, which I think that's why I think is really cool. So we're basically building a REST API for finance and operations for looking at inventory. And that's why I think it's important. So if you, for instance, if you have a POS system, which is not the Microsoft one, if you have a e-commerce system, which is not the Microsoft one, you can still use the connection directly into finance and operations. There is some part of read-write. You can actually reserve things within F&O, meaning that it's not only a single way, so to speak. So okay, so does anyone have any questions? I will look through the chat here. No questions. So we've gone through the specific microservices now and why they are being used. So is it just Microsoft that can build microservices? So if we look at the add-ins, we can't create our own add-ins. That's the problem. Only Microsoft can build the add-ins, but we can create other kinds of microservices that integrates through Dataverse, that integrates through Data Lake, through data events, through event triggers, and so on, which makes it really desirable for us to build our own. When we build an external system that is going to talk to finance operations, it is good to have this in mind, that this is a good way to do it, to not have to build our own X++ code to integrate with. We can do it through the standard APIs in that case. The whole point also is to keep the code outside of finance operations. The problem, I think, historically is that for someone developing in X++, the natural place to put everything they build is within AX or finance and operations. I actually have a customer who used to have an entire route planning system built into AX4, which I would say is not the optimal place to have it. So I would say the more code we can build, we can move out of finance and operations, the less code we need to maintain when we do the integrations and so on. And there are also a lot of integrations and APIs available today, for instance, OData and so on, which means that we can actually build a lot of these already today. But just trying to keep things apart is, as I said, I think that's an important part in that case. Oh, sorry. What happened now? It stopped presenting. Sorry. Sorry about that. All right. So how do we build the microservice? So, I mean, the theory, the architecture behind this is that we should try to build it as independent of finance and operation as possible. We should try to not move the code in, and we should try to use standard APIs to integrate. So there are a lot of components within Azure today that we can use. We have Service Bus, we have Event Hub, we have Event Grid. Logic Apps is one of the integration components. Azure Functions, we can move code into an Azure function, which we then can call from F&O using an API and get data back. For instance, looking up postal codes or whatever. And we can also, if we want to build more complex functionality, we can also build them within containers in Azure, Service Fabric or Docker, meaning that it's way easier to spin up a new one if we really need it. So I think that's an important part as well. Having the manageability and the DevOps principles behind doing this kind of development and not making them dependent on each other is a good part. I think we have had a lot of situations in previous times where we have done deployments to one system, which requires us to hold off a deployment to another system because they have dependencies and we need to work with feature switches and so on. I think this is sort of easier because as long as the API between the systems is sort of sacred, we don't really have to do anything else in that case. Okay, so summary. This actually went much faster than I thought. The downside of using these add-ins and microservices is that they are a black box. Microsoft are building them, maintaining them. We can't customize them. We can't do much to them at all, which is sort of the point because we are not responsible for them. We are just using them. They are also a bit trickier to troubleshoot because we don't have that much insights into the logs and so on. But as I said before, they are sort of a black box, meaning that you push things in and you get things out, and hopefully everything is working correctly. Then performance. So the same thing there. We don't have any control over performance of these add-ins. In case we have performance issues, we need to post a support case for Microsoft, and they need to verify that there is a performance issue and that they will fix it. So that's also one of those. And of course, trust. Do we trust Microsoft in maintaining these services that we don't have control over ourselves? I would say that in many cases, the pros outweigh the cons, meaning that for us to not have to deal with some of the components means that we can do other things with the time instead, which I think it's important as well. The upsides, of course, less code, less dependencies. We don't have to verify everything thing because it's outside of the system and so on. We get new functionality within the application without having to deploy a new update in most cases. Microsoft can update the microservice without actually telling us, meaning that it will work differently. I suspect that it will be connected to the regular updates mostly, but releasing a fix for a microservice doesn't have to be connected to a release of F&O version in that case. And also performance. I mean, we get more performance in finance and operations the more code Microsoft moves outside. I mean, we filled in the subscription estimator when we set up the production environment. And if Microsoft is moving code out of our instance of F&O, meaning that we can use more CPU cycles to do things that we think are important, and they will use their own CPU cycles for hosting our add-ins, which is also a good thing because it will offload, as we said before, with the MRP and so on. It will offload the system for our users, which is also a good thing. All right, so I have gotten one question from Peter. What is the required info to retrieve info from an inventory visibility microservice? So, as I said before, the inventory visibility add-in is a REST service. So you're using like C# code, and you're talking directly to the API. You need a app registration ID for security. So you need to log into the service and be able to talk to it. But that's basically it. It's an API that you use from your regular code. So do we have any more questions? I know that there is a bit of a lag for the video stream, so that's why I'm pausing a bit. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask them. If you don't have any questions right now, and you would like to get in contact with me afterward, I am available at my email address, johan.persson@engagegroup.se. You can contact me via LinkedIn or in any other way possible. So I will be happy to answer the questions if you have any. All right. So if we don't have any other questions, this went way faster than I thought it would. So in that case, I'm guessing that you're getting a bit longer lunch this time. And I would say thank you for attending and listening. It's always fun to have an audience. So have a nice day, and I hope I hear from you soon again. Bye-bye.